Welcome to the Bio and Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Satwik Nath, and today we're delving into the fascinating world of biomedical engineering. Joining us is the esteemed Dr. Shayn Peirce-Cottler, Professor and Chair of Biomedical Engineering at UVA. Dr. Peirce-Cottler is a renowned figure in the field with over 125 peer-reviewed publications and 3 U.S. patents to her name. She is a fellow in both the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering College of Fellows and the Biomedical Engineering Society. Today, she's here to share her insights and inspire listeners to explore the exciting realm of biomedical engineering. Let's dive in. So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, Satwik, for having me. It's really nice to meet you, and I'm happy to share my excitement about our field with you and all of your listeners. I grew up in North Carolina. I decided I wanted to be a biomedical engineer when I was in 11th grade, believe it or not. That's when the light bulb came on for me, and it was because I loved my AP Bio class. I thought biology was fascinating and complicated and squishy and messy and just really interesting. And I also loved my calculus class. I really liked kind of the opposite side of biology in my mind, which was the concreteness of numbers and equations and formulas and how exact you can be in math. And I thought, bringing those two together in my life somehow, biology and math would be a really satisfying place for me to be. And I was fortunate to have a dad who was a professor of engineering at Duke University. And he introduced me to this back at the time when I was in high school, kind of a newer area of engineering, which is biomedical engineering. And so as soon as I heard about it, I immediately started looking for colleges where I could major in BME. So I went to Johns Hopkins and I did major in BME, got my bachelor's degree in 1997. And then from there, I had fallen in love with research as an undergraduate student. I had the privilege to participate in some research at the medical center at Hopkins, and I wanted to do more of it. So I went to graduate school and I actually came here to UVA and I got my PhD in BME from our department, which now I'm the chair of. So I've been on the faculty for 21 years and I've been the department chair for 2 years. And I think that, I'm very lucky that I knew what I wanted to do in 11th grade. I certainly don't think that's true for everyone, but looking back on that moment in time, I'm very grateful that I had the inspiration because it's definitely been the right choice for me.
Mhm. Speaking of that, I also found my AP Bio class very interesting. Same with my calculus class. That's also mainly the reason I really like BME too. So it's really cool to see that other people also think the same.
Absolutely. I'm excited to hear that. We're definitely kindred spirits in that way. And I would just encourage you to follow that passion and see where it takes you. For me, I haven't had any regrets.
Hmm. Would you say that's what got you the most interested in biomedical engineering, or was there something else in your time that you found even more interesting while going into the field?
The further it's like any journey that you're on, the further along you get, the more interesting things you see, and that kind of reinforces it. So I'll say one of the formative experiences when I was an undergraduate student at Hopkins, I mentioned I had the chance to do research. I started out working in a lab as a sophomore at college, and I would go maybe 2 days a week. And I continued that through my junior and senior year. I'd go down to the medical center where the BME labs were. And I was mentored by a postdoc and a professor that were doing research in cardiac biomechanics. And so for me, it was kind of this reinforcement of AP biology, like taken to a new level. Now we're looking at the heart and how the heart functions and how the heart exerts forces and experiences forces, and applying some of that math, that more, I could say concrete, rigorous, quantitative information and tool set really to the soft and squishy heart. So I got to see it like come to life in this lab. And that was a really amazing experience. It made me fall in love with research. I loved this concept of following your curiosity and exploring and discovering. It's kind of like being in a lab is like being an adventurer. You don't know where you're headed, and you have to be very observant, and you have to be very mindful and thoughtful, and it's exciting because you don't know what you're going to find. So there's that component of surprise, right? What's around the next corner. So I got really lucky to have that opportunity in undergraduate as an undergraduate student. And then when I came to UVA, I switched actually. I found my passion in something related to the heart, which is the blood vessels. Obviously, the cardiovascular system is comprised both of the heart and the vessels. So I worked, I was a researcher, a PhD student in a lab that was focused on studying the smallest blood vessels in the body. And I immediately became fascinated by those. And I think, honestly, the main reason for that is that one of my best classes, like the class I performed the best in and got the best grade in as an undergraduate student, was fluid mechanics, specifically physiological fluid mechanics. And I had been a swimmer all the way through college. I was a competitive swimmer. And for me, understanding fluids came naturally. I spent so much time in a pool, I think, like in a fluid, that it came really naturally. And so observing the movement of fluids through very, very, very small blood vessels kind of brought together two sides of my life, my athlete side, but then also my biomedical engineer side. So that was another moment for me in graduate school, the first time I ever looked into a microscope and I saw the smallest blood vessels in our body, which are called capillaries. And I saw these little red blood cells moving through these capillaries in single file line. I really appreciated that fluid and how it was moving. And it just spoke to me. And yeah, I've been captivated by small blood vessels ever since. That's kind of been my life and my research for what I've done for over 25 years now, is trying to study, how do those little vessels form? How do the fluid forces inside of those vessels affect the cell behaviors? And then how is that relevant to human disease?
Mm-hmm. Well, something I find really interesting is that even though it wasn't really academic, the swimming actually helped you later in your life. That's like really interesting. like like I know a lot of other people who swim for like fun, and I feel like if they could use this stuff later in their life in their like career paths, they would be extremely happy by it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that's really astute, Satwick. I think that, once we realize that we're one person and that one person has multiple interests and passions. And for me, being in the water was a place of joy. It was where I was the most comfortable. I was always kind of the uncoordinated kid on the land. Nobody would ever pick me first for dodgeball team. But when I was in the water, like that was kind of my home. I'm a Pisces, so, maybe
Mhm.
that comes naturally. But I just love the water. And so embracing that and kind of like that realization, like, yeah, this, I get it. Like I get the water. I would say that, there's something about each of us that is like a comfortable space, a safe space, a space that brings us joy. And to the extent we can acknowledge that and fold it into our career path, I think that, makes for a really aligned and kind of happy way to go about doing a job or living out your life. So yeah, I'm very fortunate that I was able to bring those two things together. And I hope everyone could find a way to do that, because yeah, no job is easy, but it's certainly easier if you have something to sustain you, like a lifelong passion or a curiosity or something that brings you joy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So, back to the topic of your labs, could you explain your lab's focus on microvessels?
Yeah, so we study the smallest blood vessels in the body. These are microvessels. You need a microscope to be able to
Mhm.
see them. Probably obvious. The actual size, the true size of the vessels we care about, are less than 100 microns in diameter. And the smallest blood vessel, the capillaries, I already mentioned those, they're about 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. So they're about 10 microns in diameter. So really, really small. The reason why we're so interested in them is that small blood vessels are in every single tissue and organ in your body. And so we like to think of them as really a systemic organ, right? Like the small blood vessels in your brain are connected by blood flow to the small blood vessels in your heart, to your gut, to your legs, muscles, to your liver, to your kidneys. Like really, it's the network that connects all of you. And it's extremely expansive. I don't know if you know this fun fact, Satwick, but it's a good one for trivia night. If you were to connect all of the capillaries in your body, just your body alone, the length of that expanse would wrap twice around planet Earth. So that's how many capillaries you have in your body. It's estimated to be over 10 billion. Which is a lot of tissue, right? That's a lot of you that is actually made up of your small blood vessels. And the reason for that is because there's not a single cell in your body that can be further away from a blood vessel than 100 microns. If it is further away, it won't be alive because it's not getting enough oxygen and nutrients. So every cell in your body has to be within at least 100 microns to stay alive, 100 microns of a capillary to stay alive, to get enough oxygen. So this is like, showing why I'm so excited about it, and why I care about it is like these blood vessels are everywhere, and almost every single disease that you can name, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease and obesity, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, infectious disease, almost every disease in your body, the microcirculation will be playing an important role, either as a contributor or as something that gets really damaged by that disease, such as in the case of diabetes, for example, or Alzheimer's disease. So we're trying to study these small blood vessels because they're everywhere. You have billions of them, literally, and they're really important in disease.
Well, that's super interesting. And following on to that question, do you guys use like machine learning and new technologies to contribute to your research?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the fun of being an engineer is that we're early adopters of technology, and we're actually creating new technologies with existing technologies by combining them and refining them. So that's one of the best parts of being an engineer is that we're not just users, we're also developers and refiners and implementers. So we do in my lab, the way we approach the study of the microcirculation is by combining experimental models with computational models, because again, back to what I said very early on, biology is complicated. It's squishy, it's changing, it's dynamic, it's heterogeneous, right? Like it's not an easy thing to just like draw a picture of and it's going to stay that way. So computer models help us make predictions. They can kind of encapsulate that complexity and show us how the different pieces and parts come together as a system, and then that will lead to some important consequence, like diabetic wound, whether it heals or not. We can make those predictions using our computational models. Now, as everybody knows, if you're working with a computer in this day and age, you're crazy if you're not leveraging the tools of machine learning and AI. So we're absolutely doing that. So our models are generating tons and tons of data that we are analyzing using machine learning, and then also leveraging the output of the machine learning algorithms to further refine our understanding of biology. So it's a really nice feedback loop. We have the experiments driving the models enabled by machine learning and AI telling us what experiments to do. And that loop is actually what's helping us move forward with a deeper understanding about all this really complicated biology.
So for the technologies you use, what would you say is the most interesting one?
So I'm a little biased, but I like two parts of what we do. On the experimental side, I think the most interesting is the in vivo imaging that we do. So we're able to actually make movies of capillaries inside of living tissues. So using, very advanced microscopy techniques and computational techniques, we can make these incredible movies of how blood vessels are changing over time. One example, in collaboration with one of my colleagues in neuroscience at UVA, whose name is Dr. Ao Ukpong, we're doing cranial window implantations into animal models of Alzheimer's and diabetes. And we're able to use our microscopes to peer into these clear windows to see the blood vessels on the surface of the brain and image them over time and track how they're responding to both Alzheimer's and diabetes. and in many cases too, how these two diseases are coming together to affect negatively the blood vessel function and structure in the brain. So I'm really excited about the imaging that we can do. I'm also excited on the computational side about the types of models that we build, which are called agent-based models. And it's a type of modeling technique that was used a lot during the COVID pandemic, actually, to predict kind of how disease would unfold in a population. And it's also a technique that's been widely used in the field of ecology. But we were one of the first groups in the world, this was back when I was a graduate student, to adopt this technology for simulating biological cells in tissues. And so that's kind of the other side of my excitement. I have both the experimental hat and the modeling hat. And I think with the imaging and the agent-based modeling, we're bringing them together in really cool ways to understand disease and also identify new interventions that we could develop, whether it's drugs or stem cell therapy or other interventions that would help us kind of make the tissue healthy again by targeting the microcirculation.
Speaking of tissues, could you tell us a little bit more about your work on tissue regeneration?
Yeah, so I mentioned this, it's a really important point. If you want to grow a tissue or regenerate a tissue, the cells that are going to need to do that are only able to do that if they can get oxygen and nutrients. And the only way they can get oxygen and nutrients is if we have capillaries there to deliver it. So there's so much of tissue regeneration that's reliant on getting blood vessels to grow into the tissue that's wounded or injured or that you ultimately want to regenerate. And so people have said that, that's actually a critical bottleneck in the field. It doesn't matter. You can have the greatest tissue engineering approaches in the world. Once your tissue gets bigger than 100 microns by 100 microns by 100 microns, low volume, those cells are going to be dead if you don't have capillaries feeding them oxygen and nutrients and returning waste and carbon dioxide back to your system. So that's something that we've been focusing on. We've used all different types of strategies. We've explored the use of adult stem cells that we harvest from fat tissue or adipose tissue. We've looked at the role of various small molecules and peptides in accelerating that process. We've looked at different mechanical forces that we can impose on the cells to kind of trigger them to grow blood vessels more effectively. We have a big tool bag. There's a lot of things, drugs, cells, other forces that we've tried to bring together. And we use, actually, this is where our computational modeling is really helpful, is it can help us kind of refine our approaches and focus in on the ones that we think that will be, most useful, most likely to succeed. And then those are the ones that we can go and test in the lab.
That's really interesting. So, what would you say is the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome during your time?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think, at different times, there's been different obstacles. So as an undergraduate student, I would say in engineering, and I think this is at any institution, the first 2 years, I'll say, the first 2 years of an engineering curriculum as a undergraduate student pursuing a bachelor's degree, they're just really hard. And I think that what I mean by hard is that they don't necessarily, the courses you're taking it's not immediately obvious how they will relate to the exciting work that you want to do as an engineer. And so a little bit, it was hard for me, it was to kind of see the big picture and slogging through some really hard courses. That just the amount of material, the relevance of the material, it was just kind of, sometimes you take courses, this happens in high school and middle school, you take courses and you're like, I just don't love this stuff, but I love that it's going to take me to the place I want to get to. And so just keeping that in mind is sometimes challenging, right? Because it's easy to give up when things are hard. So I'm so glad I stuck it out. And I think every engineer that, earns a degree looks back on those first 2 years and says, yeah, those weren't the best, but things got a lot better when I, became a junior or a senior because the courses got more relevant to my particular interests as a biomedical engineer. So I think that was a natural struggle. I think in graduate school also, anyone that's interested in doing a PhD is a journey. And like all journeys, there's parts that are really, really fun and easy. And then there's parts that are hard, right? Like the mountains you have to climb. And sometimes you stumble and fall and roll back down the mountain a little bit and you have to get back up because, yeah, like doing a dissertation, it's, you're basically, the definition of a dissertation is you're discovering something or inventing something that nobody has ever discovered or invented, right? And so you're literally the first, right? And we've all, been in situations and seen the movies where the adventurer, right, like that they're going to struggle. So I think becoming a biomedical engineer, it takes a lot of resilience. It takes the ability to like bounce back up when you get hit. And I think those are, kind of two examples early on. I'd say more recently, some of the challenges, obviously the COVID pandemic was hard on absolutely everyone. It was very hard on researchers because research is one of these things that you kind of have to be here every day to get it done because our experiments, there's no pause button on those experiments. So that was tough for everybody in the community, but I would say, we've bounced back from that. Yeah. So now I think, my biggest challenge, Satwick, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I feel like it's true. My biggest challenge is to decide what to focus on because there's so many exciting things that somebody can do as a biomedical engineer. Sometimes, there's just too many options. And so that's where it takes kind of the hard decisions is like, what do I really want to focus on? Acknowledging I can't do everything I want to do because it's all super cool.
Yeah, so speaking of all the exciting things you have to focus on, what would you say is the most exciting?
Oh my gosh, it's hard to pick. I have a lot of projects going on in my lab right now, and each project is led by a very talented graduate student or undergraduate student. So it's really hard to say, but I think probably at the highest level, what's most exciting is how I'm seeing the tools that we're developing, both the experimental tools with the imaging, but also the computational tools with the agent-based modeling, seeing how they're able to come together and really reinforce one another and accelerate the discovery process. So I think that it's, it takes a long time to get experiments to work and to get models to work, but I think we're now at a place where they're really jiving really well, and so we can move a lot more quickly. So I have projects looking at, as I already mentioned, looking at Alzheimer's and diabetes and the intersection of those diseases in the brain microcirculation. I have a really exciting project looking at extracellular vesicles that are released by blood vessel cells that communicate with cancer cells and can do things like, potentially stimulate various cancer development, cancer growth, and metastasis. That's really exciting. I have a project in the lung that's looking at the role and contribution of the smallest blood vessels to lung fibrosis. So that's one of the great things about studying the microcirculation is we can, do work in the brain, in the lung, in the pancreas, in the studying of cancer. We're not restricted to any one organ or tissue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the diversity of your work is really interesting. And I feel like if I worked in a field that diverse, I would never get bored of anything either.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely don't get bored.
Mm-hmm.
There's more you can do.
So, what would you say what role collaboration takes in all of your work?
Oh, I love that question. And it's exactly relevant. It's a perfect segue to your last comment. So when we're working in all of these different tissues and organs, obviously we can't be experts in every single tissue and organ. And we're not, we don't want to be. So we have to collaborate with neuroscientists. I mentioned my collaborator, Dr. Ao, who's a neuroscientist at UVA, in order to get the understanding of the brain. We know blood vessels, but we don't know neurons. We don't know glial cells. We don't know astrocytes. And those are all very important cells that communicate with the blood vessels in the brain. So having that collaboration with Dr. Ao is absolutely essential for us to be able to do anything that's relevant in the neuroscience community. Likewise, we have to collaborate with pulmonologists to be able to do work in the lung. We're not lung experts. Again, we know the microcirculation, we know the blood vessels, but there's so much more of that organ that we're just, that's not our wheelhouse. So we're reliant on collaborators to tell us, what's going on, what are the, important questions, where's the field headed, what are the tools that are available to studying different, aspects of disease. And the same thing goes with pancreatic cancer. We're not cancer researchers at all. Again, we know the blood vessels, but we have to collaborate with oncologists and cancer researchers to know what the heck is going on when we're looking at blood vessels in a tumor.
Mm-hmm. So, one other question I have for you is, what would you advise to high schoolers who want to pursue BME in universities?
Oh, I love that. Well, I'd say first of all, uh, figure out what's exciting about biomedical engineering to you. What part of this crazy broad, extremely broad field are you most interested in? And to do that, I would encourage you to read articles, popular press articles. I would encourage you to talk to some biomedical engineers about their work and their research. Um, to put a point on it, when people ask me, what is biomedical engineering? I say biomedical engineering is the field that creates anything that is going to go into a patient, that is going to peer through a patient, like imaging, for example, and that's going to touch a patient, like, non-invasive monitoring, for example, or, wearable sensors. So it is really broad. Biomedical engineers are working in the pharmaceutical industry, in the biomedical imaging industry, in the medical device industry. There's a lot of biomedical engineers working there. Biotechnology industry, regulatory industry. The list goes on and on. Patent law. I mean, there's literally biomedical engineers everywhere. And a lot of biomedical engineers decide that they want to get their medical degree and go on to be medical doctors as well. It's a great career path if you're interested in doing pre-med and becoming a clinician. So literally, like, the options are boundless when you consider the types of impact that biomedical engineers have. So for a high school student, it can be overwhelming. It's like, where do I even start, right? But talking to people, reading articles, you will start to get a sense for whether you like imaging, or the drugs, or the tissue engineering, or the medical devices, right? You can kind of put our field into some of these broad buckets, or the computational systems aspect. So much of our field now is very much, it looks like data science or computer science, but because those tools are being applied to medical problems, patients and doctors' lives, it takes on a very different flavor in biomedical engineering. But if you're interested in computer science or data science, doing biomedical engineering as a major is a wonderful place to live out that dream, because you're able to do so in the very specific context of human health. So yeah, I think that's the challenge for a high school student, is like, where do I go in this vast ocean of possibilities, all of which may look exciting? It's about kind of like figuring out the things that you're most excited about. And that takes research, time, and talking to people.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we conclude?
Just that, the world needs more biomedical engineers, I'll tell you. Our aging population, our population of patients with diabetes, Alzheimer's, obesity, it's only growing, and it's growing at really rates that are quite, alarming when you think about the burden on healthcare in this country and globally as well. So I would say, if you're even considering it, for the greater good, consider it seriously, because I think the more biomedical engineers we have trained in the world to, help people and help overcome, these horrible diseases, both at the individual patient level who's suffering from them, but also at the, broader kind of, human health, public health level. We need a strong workforce. And so I love that you're doing this, Satwik. I congratulate you on promoting this field, and I really appreciate you for that.
Okay, well, that concludes our fascinating conversation with Dr. Shayn Peirce-Cottler, a true pioneer in biomedical engineering. Her passion and expertise are truly inspiring. Stay tuned for more captivating discussions at the crossroads of biology, medicine, and innovation. This is Satwik Nath signing off from the Bio and Beyond podcast. Remember, the journey of scientific discovery is endless.